The auction hall fell silent as Kyvrok Nethius raised his biomechanical hand, the gesture alone worth more than most species' homeworlds. Around him, the galaxy's elite, Vorthan merchant princes, crystalline Siphic nobles, and shadow-wreathed Next High overlords watched as humanity's most powerful man acquired yet another prize. Sold. The last living ethereal bloom from Centauri Prime goes to Lord Nethies for 12 billion standard credits. Kyvrok barely registered the applause. His augmented eyes, glowing with quantum processors, tracked every movement in the hall. At 43, he had built an empire that spanned 7 systems, commanded fleets that made entire civilizations kneel, and owned artifacts that gods had once wielded. Yet tonight, none of it mattered. She stood at the back of the hall, her presence like a star that refused to be dimmed by the surrounding darkness. Dr. Lirelei Voss, the xenobiologist whose research had saved 3 species from extinction, whose gentle hands had healed wounds that advanced medicine couldn't touch. Her auburn hair caught the light from the auction displays, and her emerald eyes held a warmth that his cold empire had never known. Kyvrok had first encountered her 6 months ago on Station Meridian, where she'd been treating refugees from the Helix War. He'd offered her a position in his personal research division, a salary that could have funded entire universities. She'd politely declined, then spent the evening helping a dying Rigelian child while he watched from the shadows, mesmerized. Since then, he'd tried everything. Anonymous donations to her projects returned when she discovered the source. Rare medical supplies delivered to her clinics redistributed to needier facilities. Even a custom-built research vessel which she'd donated to the Galactic Health Consortium before he could properly introduce himself as the benefactor. Enjoying the show, the voice belonged to Admiral Korek Santi, his oldest rival and perhaps only equal in the game of galactic power. The Altarian's forearms gestured dismissively at the auction floor. Though I suspect you're not here for the art. Kyvrok's expression didn't change, but his internal threat assessment systems activated automatically. I collect what others cannot possess. Ah, but that's where you're wrong, my friend. Korek's translator rendered his species equivalent of laughter into harmonic tones. Some things grow more valuable precisely because they cannot be owned. As if sensing their attention, Lirelei turned slightly, her gaze meeting Kyvrok's across the crowded hall. For a moment, the universe contracted to just that connection to people seeing each other across an impossible divide. Then she smiled, not the calculated expression he was used to from those who wanted something from him, but something genuine and sad, as if she could see straight through his armor to the man he'd buried beneath ambition and augmentation. She moved toward the exit, and Kyvrok found himself rising from his seat, leaving behind an auction where he'd just spent more money than most civilizations would see in a century. His security detail moved to follow, but he waved them back with a sharp gesture. In the corridor outside, she was waiting for him, her medical scanner casting a soft blue glow over her features as she checked on a injured server whose tray had been knocked over by a drunk hegemony official. Your ribs are cracked, she told the young man gently, running the scanner along his torso. The medics downstairs can fix this easily, but you shouldn't lift anything heavy for a few days. She helped him to his feet with a kindness that made Kyvrok's augmented heart skip a beat in its mechanical rhythm. This was why she couldn't be bought or controlled, because her wealth wasn't measured in credits, but in the lives she touched, the pain she eased, the hope she carried wherever she went. And for the first time in his life, Kyvrok Nethies wanted something he couldn't simply take. 3 days after the auction, Kyvrok's flagship Dominion's Edge hung in orbit above Sanctuary Station, a medical facility carved into an asteroid where Dr. Lirelei Voss ran her free clinic. His bridge crew maintained professional silence as their commander stared out at the modest installation, though several exchanged worried glances. In 30 years of service, they'd never seen him hesitate before any objective. Sir, his tactical officer, Commander Vex Haldren ventured carefully. The delegation from the Corvin Systems is requesting an audience about the mining rights. Handle it, Kyvrok replied without turning from the viewport. Through his enhanced vision, he could see the stream of patients entering the station's medical bays. Refugees, miners with black lungs, spacers suffering from void sickness, all receiving treatment they couldn't afford. From a woman who could have been living in luxury, his communications array chimed with an incoming message. Liralay's face appeared on his personal screen, her expression politely professional despite the dark circles under her eyes. Mr. Nethys, I appreciate your interest in our work here, but hovering a dreadnought over a medical station is making my patients nervous. Several have already left without treatment. The accusation hit him harder than any weapon ever had. That wasn't my intention. Then what was? Her directness, free of the careful deference he was accustomed to, was both jarring and refreshing. You've been attempting to assist my work for months now, but everything you touch becomes a transaction, a power play. That's not what healing is about. Kyvrak's jaw tightened. I've seen the reports from your station. You're operating beyond capacity, understaffed, running out of supplies. I could solve these problems with a single transfer. At what cost? Liralay leaned forward, her green eyes intense. I've researched you, Kyvrak, Nethys. I know about the Vega colony incident, the forced relocations on Kepler 44 to beat the species, driven to extinction because they stood between you and a resource you wanted. Your help always comes with strings attached. The words stung because they were true. But she couldn't understand that everything he'd done had been necessary, calculated, part of a larger design to bring order to a chaotic galaxy. Those were business decisions, he said finally. No. Her voice was soft but unyielding. They were choices. Just like the choice you're making now, thinking you can win something you label as love, through displays of wealth and power. The transmission ended, leaving Kyvrok alone with his reflection in the darkened screen. Around him, the bridge hummed with the quiet efficiency of his empire, an empire built on the principle that everything had a price. Everyone had weaknesses to exploit, and sufficient force could overcome any obstacle. But Liralay had just proven him wrong on all counts. 2 hours later, he materialized in the station's main corridor, using his personal teleporter, drawing startled looks from patients and staff. He'd come alone, leaving his security detail behind, risk that would have horrified his advisors. He found her in Surgery Bay 7, working on a young Rigelian, whose crystalline lung structure had been shattered in a mining accident. Her hands moved with precision that would have impressed his own military surgeons. Guided by an intuition that no amount of technology could replicate, through the observation window, he watched her save a life that any insurance algorithm would have written off as unprofitable. When she finally emerged, exhaustion evident in every line of her body, she stopped short at seeing him. I want to understand, he said simply. She studied his face for a long moment, looking for deception or manipulation. Understand what? Why you do this? Why you choose to exhaust yourself helping people who can never repay you, when you could have anything you wanted? Liralay was quiet for so long he thought she might not answer. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of old pain. Because someone once helped me when I had nothing to offer in return. Because every life has value that can't be measured in credits, or power, or strategic advantage. She met his eyes directly. Because the moment we start deciding who deserves saving and who doesn't, we stop being human. Kyvrak felt something crack inside his chest, not his mechanical heart, but something deeper. Something he'd thought he'd successfully buried decades ago. Then teach me, he said. The first lesson came at 0347 station time, when alarms jolted Kyvrak from the narrow cat in the volunteer quarters. A transport carrying Cerelian refugees had suffered catastrophic engine failure, and the survivors were being brought in with severe radiation exposure. he found Lirelei already in the trauma bay, her hair pulled back as she worked over a young girl whose scales were falling off in patches. The child's mother sat nearby, singing a haunting melody in her native tongue while tears streamed down her face. "Grab that neural stabilizer," Lirelei said, without looking up, apparently having sensed his presence. "Her nervous system is shutting down." Kyvrok had commanded fleets, negotiated treaties, orchestrated the rise and fall of governments. But holding the medical device while Lirelei fought to save a dying child's life felt more significant than any of it. His enhanced reflexes, designed for combat, now steadied instruments that measured heartbeats instead of targeting solutions. "She's not going to make it," he said, reading the monitors with tactical objectivity. "Her cellular structure is breaking down too rapidly." "Maybe." Lirelei's voice never wavered as she worked. "But she hasn't given up yet, so neither will I." 3 hours later, the girl's scales had begun to regenerate, her vitals stabilizing as the advanced treatment protocols took effect. Her mother's song had become one of gratitude, and when she pressed Kyvrak's hand between both of hers, speaking words he didn't understand, but felt nonetheless, something fundamental shifted in his perception. "The transport that failed," he said quietly, as they cleaned up. "It was sabotaged." Lirelei paused, a medical scanner halfway to the sterilization unit. "How do you know?" "Because I know who profits from Cerelian displacement. Their homeworld sits on one of the richest dilithium deposits in the sector." His enhanced eyes flickered as he accessed data streams. 3 separate corporations have been pressuring the Galactic Council to declare their territory a protected mining zone, including yours. The question hung in the air between them. Kyvrak's empire had been built on such calculations: create a crisis, offer a solution, profit from the aftermath. The Cerelians would have been just another line item in a quarterly report. "Not anymore," he said. That night, he sent encrypted orders to his corporate fleet. The ships that had been moving toward Cerelian space received new destinations. The mining permits his lawyers had been pursuing were withdrawn, and the transport company responsible for the sabotage found their assets frozen pending a very thorough investigation. But Lirelei didn't thank him. Instead, she asked the question that cut deeper than any weapon. How many others like them have there been? How many families destroyed because it was profitable? Kyvrak couldn't answer. The numbers were too vast, too abstract to comprehend as individual tragedies. But over the following days, as he worked alongside Lirelei, treating the refugees, each face began to represent not a statistic, but a story. The father who'd lost his wife in the transport explosion, but still sang lullabies to calm his injured son. The grandmother who gave up her place in line, so a younger patient could receive treatment first. The teenage boy who'd shielded his sister from radiation with his own body. "This is why I can't love you," Lirelei said on the 3rd night, as they stood on the observation deck watching the stars. "Not because you lack the capacity for goodness, but because you've spent so long choosing not to use it." Her words should have been devastating, but instead they offered something he'd never expected: hope, because choice implied the possibility of choosing differently. "Then I'll prove I can change," he said. She turned to him then, her expression sad, but not unkind. "That's still the wrong answer, Kyvrok. You can't change for someone else's love. You have to change because it's right." Over the following weeks, he began to understand what she meant. Each shift in the medical bay, each life saved, each small act of kindness, without expectation of reward, slowly rewrote the neural pathways that had governed his existence. His augmented systems, designed to calculate advantage and exploit weakness, began to recognize patterns of compassion and connection. But the greatest lesson came when a dying Vorthan elder, one of the species his corporations had displaced decades earlier, recognized him despite his attempts at anonymity. "You," the old alien whispered, his compound eyes focusing with difficulty. You are the destroyer of worlds. Kyvrok stood frozen, waiting for accusation, for hatred, for the weight of his crimes to finally crush him. Instead, the elder reached out with a trembling hand. But you are here now, he continued, helping. Perhaps there is hope for redemption, even for those who have fallen furthest. The elder died peacefully an hour later, his family around him, having received pain relief that made his final moments bearable, instead of agonizing. And Kyvrok understood, finally, what Lirelei had been trying to teach him. Love wasn't something to be won, or earned, or deserved. It was something to be given freely, without condition, without expectation of return. Just as she gave her healing to everyone who needed it, regardless of who they were, or what they could offer. The attack came at dawn, ship time, when the station's defenses were cycling through their maintenance protocols. Kyvrok felt the impact through the deck plating seconds before the alarms began their wailing cry. His combat instincts, dormant, but never truly asleep, snapped him instantly to full alertness. In the medical bay, chaos reigned. Emergency lighting cast everything in bloody red shadows as Lirelei moved between the injured, her hands steady despite the station shaking around them. Through the viewports, Kyvrok could see the attacking vessel's sleek, predatory shapes bearing the crimson markings of the Helix Consortium. How many? He asked Commander Vex, who had materialized beside him with grim efficiency. 12 frigates, 2 heavy cruisers. They're demanding surrender and transfer of all medical personnel. Vex's expression was carefully neutral. Sir, my scans indicate Admiral Corex Xanti is commanding the lead vessel. Of course it was Corex. Kyvrok's rival had been watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And what better way to break humanity's most powerful man than to threaten the one thing he'd finally learned to value above profit? Estimated time until they breached the medical sections: 17 minutes, assuming they maintained current assault patterns. 17 minutes. Kyvrok's enhanced mind ran through tactical scenarios, each one ending in the same conclusion. Sanctuary Station couldn't withstand a concentrated assault. The medical facility had minimal defensive capabilities by design. Weapons of war had no place in a house of healing. But Kyvrok, Nethys commanded the most advanced military fleet in human space. Signal the Dominion's edge, he ordered. Full combat alert. Prepare to engage. Sir. Vex hesitated, something he'd never done in 30 years of service. Long-range sensors detect additional consortium vessels moving to intercept. Bait. Anticipated your response? The trap was elegant in its simplicity. Corex knew that Kyvrok would never abandon the station and Lirelei to save himself. The Altarian had engineered a scenario where humanity's greatest military asset would be forced into an unwinnable battle, eliminating a rival while claiming to be defending innocent medical personnel from a rogue warlord. Another impact shook the station, and through the medical bay's reinforced windows, Kyvrok saw escape pods launching from the civilian sections. But Lirelei and her staff weren't leaving. They couldn't. Too many patients were too critical to move, and someone had to stay to maintain the life support systems. There is another option, Vex said quietly. Kyvrok turned to his oldest friend, the man who'd helped him build an empire from nothing, who'd shared the burden of every dark decision they'd made together. Corex wants you, not them. If you surrender yourself, he'll let the station be. His reputation as a civilized warrior demands it. The calculation was simple. Trade one life for thousands. Accept defeat to ensure their survival. It was the kind of tactical retreat that a younger Kyvrok would have dismissed as weakness, but which he now recognized as perhaps the most difficult form of strength. But as he prepared to give the order, Lirelei appeared at his side, her medical coat stained with blood, but her eyes clear and determined. Don't, she said simply. You don't understand the situation. I understand perfectly. She placed a hand on his arm, and he felt the tremor in her fingers. She was trying so hard to hide Corex contacted me 3 days ago. He offered to ensure the station's protection, unlimited funding, whatever resources I needed. All I had to do was convince you to come here alone and unarmed. The betrayal hit him like a physical blow. And you're telling me this now because I turned him down. Her voice was steady, but tears tracked down her cheeks. Because I realized that somewhere in these past weeks, I stopped seeing you as the monster who'd destroyed so many lives, and started seeing you as the man who was trying to save them. Around them, the station groaned under another assault. Medical equipment sparked and failed as power conduits overloaded. In the distance, he could hear the sound of hull breaches being sealed by emergency systems that wouldn't hold much longer. There's a third option, Lirelei said. We evacuate everyone we can, and I go with you to face Corex, together. Absolutely. Not? Why? Because you want to protect me. Her smile was sad, but determined. This is my choice, Kyvrok. My patience, my station, my responsibility. And if we're going to face this, we face it as equals. Before he could argue, her communicator chimed with an incoming transmission. Corex's image appeared, his forearms spread in a gesture of mock benevolence. Dr. Voss, I trust you've had time to reconsider my offer. I'd hate for any harm to come to your charitable work. ... Due to the poor decisions of your benefactor. Actually, Lirelei said, her voice carrying across the comm channel with crystalline clarity, I have a count. The meeting took place in the neutral zone between the two fleets, aboard a small diplomatic shuttle that Corex had designated as the exchange point. The Altarian admiral waited in the central chamber, his forearms folded in a display of patient superiority, his ship's weapons trained on both Sanctuary Station and Kyvrok's fleet in perfect tactical balance. Dr. Voss, Corex inclined his massive head as they entered. You look tired. The burden of caring for so many unfortunates must be exhausting. What do you want, Corex? Kyvrok's voice carried the edge of barely controlled violence, but Lirelei's presence beside him provided an anchor, a reminder of what they were truly fighting for. What I've always wanted: balance. You've upset the natural order, my friend. For decades, we've maintained a careful equilibrium. Your corporations exploit resources, mine provides security. Your expansion creates refugees, my facilities process them, profitable for all involved. Corex's translator gave his words a reasonable, almost friendly tone. But now you're saving the very people you once displaced. Healing instead of harming. It's inefficient and economically inconvenient for you, Lirelei observed. Fewer refugees means less demand for your security services. Perceptive. I see why she fascinates you, Kyvrok. Corex gestured toward the viewports, where both fleets maintained their tense standoff. But fascination is not love, and love is not worth destabilizing the entire sector's economy. The shuttle's communications array activated, displaying holographic images from across known space. Mining operations, corporate facilities, refugee camps, all bearing the marks of either Nethius Industries or Xanti Enterprises. Two empires built on the careful cultivation and exploitation of misery. This is our legacy, Corex continued. Order through controlled chaos, prosperity through managed scarcity. And you would throw it all away for one woman's approval. No. Kyvrok's voice was quiet, but carried absolute conviction. I would throw it away because it's wrong. The admission hung in the air between them, representing the complete rejection of everything both men had built their lives around. But as Kyvrok spoke the words, he felt a weight lifting from his shoulders, the weight of justifications and rationalizations, and the constant need to prove that his actions served some greater purpose. Corex's four eyes narrowed dangerously. How disappointingly sentimental. Very well. I had hoped we could reach an accommodation, but it seems you've chosen to prioritize emotion over logic. The Altarian touched a control panel, and the shuttle's screens displayed new images, not of their past crimes, but of Lirelei's work. the medical stations she'd established, the species she'd helped save from extinction, the countless lives touched by her healing. All of this ends today, Corax said. Your fleets will destroy each other in the coming battle, leaving the sector's humanitarian efforts without their primary benefactor. Thousands will die who might have lived. Suffering will increase exponentially, all because you couldn't control your emotional attachments. It was a masterful manipulation, and Kyvrak felt its impact like a physical blow. How many would die because of his choices? How many patients would go untreated because Sanctuary Station was destroyed in the crossfire? But Lirelei stepped forward, her voice clear and unafraid. You're assuming we intend to fight. Both men turned to stare at her, but she continued with the calm certainty of someone who had seen through to the heart of the matter. This was never about military superiority. It was about proving that Kyvrak could be controlled, that his feelings could be weaponized against him. But you've made a fundamental error in your calculations, Admiral. Enlighten me. You assumed that love makes us weak, that caring about others creates vulnerability. Lirelei's hand found Kyvrak's, their fingers intertwining with the simple intimacy of two people who had found something worth protecting. But love doesn't make us weaker. It makes us willing to be strong in ways we never imagined. She touched her communicator, and suddenly the shuttle's screens showed new imagery, not Corax's fleets or Kyvrak's forces, but thousands of other vessels moving through space. Medical ships, cargo haulers, passenger transports, even military vessels from a dozen different species and governments. I sent a message 3 hours ago, Lirelei explained, to every patient we've treated, every family we've helped, every world that has benefited from the medical programs you wanted to destroy. I told them what was happening here, and asked for something I've never requested before: help. The communications array crackled to life with incoming transmissions from the approaching vessels. Voices in dozens of languages, representing species that had been enemies for centuries, all united by a simple message. They had come to protect the woman who had protected them. You see, Admiral Lirelei continued, you were right about one thing. Love can be a weakness when it's selfish, when it demands possession and control. But when love becomes service, when it inspires others to something greater than themselves, it becomes the most powerful force in the universe. Corax stared at the displays, his tactical mind struggling to process a scenario he had never imagined. His carefully planned battle between two rival empires had become something unprecedented, dozens of former enemies standing together to defend an ideal. This changes nothing, he said finally, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. I can still destroy the station. Yes, Kyvrak agreed. You can. But then you'll have to explain to the Galactic Council why you murdered civilians under the protection of 12 different governments. You'll have to justify attacking a medical facility to every species you've ever claimed to be defending. The shuttle fell silent, except for the hum of life support systems. Through the viewports, the assembled fleets created a tapestry of light against the stars, not the harsh, aggressive illumination of weapons preparing to fire, but the gentler glow of running lights and communication arrays as strangers worked together to coordinate their protection of something precious. Corax straightened to his full imposing height, but for the first time in decades, Kyvrak saw uncertainty in his rival's posture. This isn't over, the Altarian said. No, Lirelei replied. It's just beginning. 2 years later, Kyvrak stood in the observation deck of New Sanctuary, watching the construction crews put finishing touches on the station's latest expansion. What had begun as a small medical facility carved into an asteroid had grown into something unprecedented, a fully functional city where healing, research, and hope coexisted in perfect harmony. Below, in the pediatric wing, Lirelei was conducting her weekly rounds, her auburn hair now touched with silver, but her hands as steady as ever. Through the transparent aluminum walls, he could see her examining a young Helix Consortium, refugee one of thousands who had fled Corax's increasingly unstable empire. The irony wasn't lost on him. In trying to destroy their work, Corax had inadvertently advertised it across the galaxy. Species that had never heard of Sanctuary Station now sent their sickest and most vulnerable, trusting in the reputation of the woman who had turned an enemy fleet into protectors with nothing but truth and compassion. "Sir," Commander Vex approached, carrying a datapad with the day's reports. His old friend had adapted to their new mission with remarkable grace, transforming from a military tactician into a logistics coordinator. "The Cerulean Council has confirmed their donation of the dilithium processing facility. They insist it's partial payment for medical services rendered, though Dr. Voss wants to refuse it again." Kyvrok smiled. "Transfer it to the station's emergency fund. If she won't accept payment directly, we'll make sure the resources are available when she needs them." "Already done, sir." Also, Admiral Corax has requested another meeting through diplomatic channels. His empire is facing internal rebellion, and several of his former clients are seeking alternative arrangements. The decline of the Zenti enterprises had been swift and brutal. Without Kyvrok as a foil, Corax had been forced to create increasingly expensive conflicts to maintain his business model. Eventually, even his most loyal clients had begun to question the cost of his protection. Wars that served no purpose beyond profit had a way of becoming unpopular when people had better options. "Schedule the meeting for next month," Kyvrok decided, "and make sure Dr. Voss is available to participate. He'll need to understand that this isn't about defeating him, it's about offering him a chance to choose differently." Vex nodded and departed, leaving Kyvrok alone with his thoughts. Through the quantum glass windows, he could see the latest additions to their growing fleet, not warships, but hospital ships, research vessels, and transport craft designed to carry hope to the furthest reaches of known space. The Nethys Industries logo had been quietly retired, replaced with a new symbol, a stylized medical caduceus surrounded by stars, representing healing that reached across the darkness between worlds. His corporate empire still existed, but its focus had shifted entirely. Instead of exploitation, they now specialized in sustainable development. Instead of creating refugees, they helped resettle them. Instead of weapons of war, they manufactured medical equipment. Thought the transformation hadn't been easy. Entire divisions had to be retrained or replaced. Shareholders had rebelled at the dramatic decrease in short-term profits. Several subsidiary companies had declared independence rather than abandon their more profitable ventures. But the numbers, over time, had proven the wisdom of the change. Sustainable development created long-term partnerships. Medical innovation opened new markets, and their reputation as ethical operators had attracted clients who valued reliability over raw profit margins. More importantly, Kyvrok slept better at night. Footsteps behind him announced Liralay's arrival before her reflection appeared in the window beside his. She moved with the quiet exhaustion of someone who had spent the day fighting death and winning more often than not. "The Helix child?" he asked. "Stabilized. The neural damage was more extensive than we initially thought, but the new regeneration protocols are showing promise." She leaned against the railing, her shoulder touching his. "She'll make a full recovery." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the stars and the steady stream of ships arriving with patients, supplies, and volunteers. The sight never failed to amaze him, this testament to what could be accomplished when power served compassion, instead of the other way around. "I love you," he said quietly. It wasn't the first time he'd spoken the words, but they still carried the weight of miracle. For so long, he'd believed that love was another form of possession, another way to acquire and control. Lirilay had taught him that true love was the exact opposite, a willingness to serve without expectation, to give without receiving, to find strength in vulnerability. "I know," she replied, her hand finding his, "and I love you too." The words were simple, but they carried the promise of everything they had built together, and everything they would continue to build. Not an empire based on fear and exploitation, but a legacy of healing that would outlast them both. In the distance, another ship approached, this one bearing the diplomatic colors of the Vorthan Assembly. Another species seeking alliance, another opportunity to choose hope over hatred, cooperation over conquest. Ready for another challenge? Lirelei asked, watching the approaching vessel. Kyvrak squeezed her hand gently, marveling as always at the way her touch could make him feel both completely vulnerable and absolutely invincible. With you, always. Together, they walked toward the docking bay, ready to welcome new allies in their quiet revolution. Behind them, New Sanctuary continued its eternal mission, a beacon of healing in the darkness. Proof that even the most hardened heart could learn to love, and that love, freely given, was indeed the most powerful force in the universe. The galaxy would never be the same, and for the first time in his life, Kyvrak Nethys knew with absolute certainty that the change was for the better. The end.